At school, when students are assigned to write essays about family, all the children write mostly about their parents, their mom, dad, or only about moms if they don't have a dad. I was always confused, what should I do? Usually I imagined something. I recalled a movie or a short story and chose someone who resembled the main character as my parents. My dad was a pilot, a polar explorer trapped in the ice, an explorer of Africa or some new land, a fireman, an animal trainer, a submarine captain, and even a spaceman. My mother was a teacher who bravely went to teach children in South Africa, a veterinarian who saved penguins in Antarctica, and consistently my mother accompanied my father on his long business trips. So my mother's choice of profession was directly proportional to my father's profession. If he was a firefighter, she was a nurse. If he was an astronaut, she headed the flight control center. If dad was an epidemiologist in Africa, mom taught little African children and, in her spare time, treated lion and giraffes. This is the reason I live with my grandmother, because they don't let little kids go to space or to Africa. I guess my teachers knew it was my imagination, but they didn't forbid me to fantasize, and they read my writing to tatters, handing it over from hand to hand. Perhaps this helped me to become a writer, graduating from the journalism department. But it would have made my readers' hair stand on end if I had written the truth about my family at the time. The only time I dared to write the truth about my parents was when I filled out the application form for admission to college. I passed the exams brilliantly and was enrolled in the front row out of the competition. However, after the first round of work practice, the dean came up to me and handed me my application form and a new blank form to rewrite it. And I wondered, what should I write? Well, you're going to be a journalist, so you should figure something out. But you shouldn't write anything like that, the dean said. I resented that it was the truth. As a future journalist, I was going to write the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And here from the first days in college, I am offered to frankly lie. You know, it's good that nowadays people don't take student CVs seriously. Otherwise, with such a biography, you would be at best at mining institute. But most likely at some vocational school specializing in plumbing, said the dean. But you took it seriously, I countered. Rewrite it and don't overdo it, because even I believed you. The dean smiled. It was only now that I realized that he had taken the true story of my parents, of my birth, as fiction. I rewrote the biography using a trick I had known since high school. My dad became a driver and my mom a housewife, and everyone was happy. And the real story of my birth and part of my parents' story was as follows. To begin with, my grandmother got me in a parcel. That's right, in a parcel. Other children were found in cabbage or brought by storks, and I was sent in a parcel. But as it turned out later, not really by the post office. The delivery man who delivered me to my grandmother dressed up as a delivery man and only put me in a previously prepared box in the entryway. My parents were both in prison, and they knew nothing about each other until they met at the prison on the Stolypin train, where they were both transporting everyone randomly like animals. Men, women, elderly, and young. That is where I was conceived, in a dirty corner. The two prisoners found each other and fell in love. My grandmother never told me who my father was exactly. She only said that he had been in prison since he was young. He had been caught stealing something when he was a teenager and got into prison for the first time when he was a juvenile. Hence the conclusion that my father was just a simple pickpocket. He was my grandmother's only son, and she didn't even dream about grandchildren. Who would marry him? And most importantly, when, given that his whole life consisted of the following: he stole, he drank, and he went to prison. In every letter, my grandmother wrote to my father that he was an ungrateful bastard who had robbed her of her grandchildren, robbed her of her future, and, in general, of all hope for the future. And then the doorbell rang. Grandma opens the door, and then there is a delivery man with a parcel in his hands. She took it and signed for it, not even noticing that the box was tied up with string, but not nailed shut. When she opened the parcel in her kitchen, she was completely shocked. There was a baby, almost a newborn baby, a month or two old. Inside was a letter from her son. Mom, you wanted a grandchild so badly that I had no choice but to send him by post. Do not worry, you can be sure that it is my son, which means that he is your grandson. What should the poor elderly woman have done? Raise me and educate me? Based on the sad experience of bringing up her son, she tried not to make the same mistakes, so that I did not grow up to be another pickpocket thief. However, while trying not to make some mistakes, my grandmother made others. I grew up to be the way I am. Thank God I did not follow in my father's footsteps. I knew even less about my mother. Her story was told to me by the same delivery man who had faked my arrival by the post. I found him when I was an adult. It wasn't hard to do. He was always there, keeping track of my fate and sending information to my parents. My mother must have been some kind of criminal too, otherwise she would have not ended up in my father's arms. She and my father were in secret correspondence between the colonies. They used to be forbidden, but one of the guards forwarded their messages to each other. I guess you figured out he was the delivery man who delivered me to my grandmother. Everything was fine until both of my parents found out that they were diagnosed with cancer almost at the same time. Such a sad coincidence, but even out of prison, there was no cure for cancer. Each of them had only one way out of prison, to the cemetery. And then the Chernobyl disaster happened in the country. You won't find the data anywhere and there's no confirmation in the official sources, but I know for sure that there were not enough liquidators, and many prisoners were offered to go to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. In exchange, they got freedom, but at what cost? They were not even registered anywhere. Almost all of them died. That was the price of the so-called freedom. At that time, even scientists had only very superficial information about radiation, not to mention the average person or prisoners. My parents were not offered such a choice. They made it themselves. They were made aware of the risks. Somehow my mother knew about the radiation and its consequences, but they had cancer, so they had nothing to lose. At least they got the chance to be together, albeit not for as long, before the end. They would have died anyway, only in a prison hospital, away from each other, away from their son. They were not destined to see their boy in Chernobyl, but they had a chance to see me each other. They voluntarily came there and motivated their action precisely by the fact that they wanted to atone for their sins before their homeland and to serve faithfully. But we know the real reason for this willingness. So that's the real story of my parents and my birth. Do you think it would qualify for a high school essay about my family? You'll say that my grandmother was my family, and I had to write about her because she raised me, gave me everything, and made me who I am. Believe me, I also wrote about my grandmother a lot, but often as a child without his parents. I was eager to write about my mom and dad, so I am grateful to my parents at least for the fact that they gave me life, because in this case, it is the most ridiculous accident. And secondly, I am grateful to them for having parents who were doctors, scientists, astronauts, heroes, and firefighters, unlike my classmates, who wrote year after year about plumbers, drivers, and educators. I believe sacredly in what I wrote in my school essays, and so it was. I thank you for listening to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and click on the bell so you don't miss new videos. And of course, thank you very much for your likes, comments, and subscriptions. It really helps a lot to develop the channel.